Welcome back to episode 6 of Duel Links Degenerates. In this series, we're going to learn about some of the dumbest decks we've seen in Duel Links, how they worked, and where they are now. Let's get started. In today's episode, we're going to talk about Woodland Sprite Burn. This deck was from a time long past called 2018. It's so old, in fact, that I almost ran out of top decks timeline in the Duel Links meta database just trying to find deck builds for it. As old as it is, this deck has kinda word of mouth traveled its way all the way into the 2020s as one of the early toxic decks in this game. So today, let's learn about how it worked. Woodland Sprite is kinda like a selection box, but instead of taking in 200 gems, it takes equip cards. And instead of outputting cards you already have, it puts out 500 damage. Woodland Sprite has a non-once per turn effect that lets you send one of its equip spells to the grave in order to inflict 500 points of damage to your opponent. Initially, this doesn't really seem like an issue. Like, you go first, you play Woodland Sprite, equip 3 spells, and you send them to the grave. 1500 damage, big whoop, right? Wrong! The problem was that we had this engine in the game called the Bamboo Sword engine. This was an engine that's run completely off of equip spells. Here's how the engine works. This one does nothing, this one is Pot of Greed if you control another bamboo sword, including the one that does nothing, and this one can search another bamboo sword when he gets sent to the grave. You see the problem? You'd equip these so you could use this, you'd send this to the grave so you could search this and inflict 500 damage, and when you drew 2 cards, you'd hope to eventually draw into a few of these, which you can send to the grave for another 500 damage. And then, like most decks we cover, it was made even better by its skill. Duel, Standby, was one of the earliest skills in this game. At the time, it worked by adding an extra card to your starting hand. Of course, it's balanced by the fact that it also adds an extra card to your opponent's hand as well. But as far as FTK decks are concerned, it doesn't really matter how many cards your opponent has in their hands, if they're dead. The rest of the deck was filled with what I like to call the please let me open this card starter pack. Because of how consistent the bamboo engine was, if you could manage to open a Woodland Sprite, there was a pretty good chance you could just burn your opponent to death before they could do anything. Even a passing glance at one of these deck lists should be enough to tell you that the deck was nerfed into the ground. This deck was so old that I had to find some of the hits on GameA.com. I also referenced the Law Yu-Gi-Oh's History of Duel Links series, which, if you haven't watched yet, you should. It's a great series. On January 24th, 2018, Woodland Sprite would be hit to Limit 1 with an emergency ban list, because Konami typically doesn't like players getting disintegrated in one turn. Not even 2 weeks later, Konami would then hit the Bamboo Sword engine on February 5th, 2018. Not just because of this deck, but because of how good it was in every single deck. Finally, to nerf everything into the ground, later that year, on June 26, 2018, Duel, Standby was hit to stop any effects from going off on your turn. Funnily enough, this actually created a different set of problems, but we'll talk about that some other day. After being absolutely murdered by John Konami himself, this deck has not seen play ever again. But as old as it is, its consistency would land itself as the best FTK deck in this game. Thank you folks for watching, and if you have any other decks you'd like me to cover, please leave them in the comments below.